Commissioners, our briefing today is for the meeting of, this is hard for me to say because it doesn't seem like it's January 20th. That's what this briefing is for. We've just finished Christmas holidays, we finished the New Year's holidays, and this is our first meeting of 2022. And I know that all of the commissioners are ready to rock and roll and make it happen in Forsyth County, and I'm happy to be back. I actually missed not coming in and having a meeting. And it's a pleasure to see Commissioner Wisenhunt all the way down there at this end, and then Commissioner Linville all the way over at the right end. That doesn't mean you're at the far left, you're at the far right. It's just the way we're sitting. But it's good to be back with everybody. And as we begin 22, I would like to turn the meeting over to our Vice Chairman, Don Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we have actually 5 discussion items, and we're going to do those first before we actually do the briefing for the January 20th meeting. And the first item on the list is our weekly COVID-19 update from Joshua Swift. So Joshua, you are on. I don't see your initials yet on the.
He very well could be still celebrating Christmas or New Year's.
Here he is. He's coming.
There he comes.
There he is.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Just a quick update. You can see that as our COVID cases show today, we are averaging now 779 cases per day. We reported 1,205 cases in the last 24 hours. Cases are up 276% in the last 14 days. And I would just note that this is not including at-home tests that are not reportable to the Department of Public Health or to the State Division of Public Health. So this is really underreporting, but this is what we have on record. Over 10,000 cases in the last 14 days. Our percent positivity is at 33%. Looking at our deaths at a total of 640 since March 2020, we've had 52 deaths in the last 47 days. And since January 1, the average age of those deaths right now is 66 years of age. Percent population, 70%, 18 and above, fully vaccinated, and 75% with at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine. So I'll switch, just have 6 short slides. You can see our COVID cases per week. Last week when I came to you, I was reporting a record. Well, we broke that again. We had 5,120 cases for the week of January 2nd. Over the last 6 weeks, we're seeing a higher number of cases that are breakthrough cases, but still right now 64% of cases over the last 6 weeks are unvaccinated individuals, and that's the reporting that we get. So we are seeing around 30% or more of our cases that are vaccinated and therefore breakthrough cases. Percent positivity, 35.9%. Again, we were at 29% last week. That's the highest we had seen. So we broke that record now, 35, right at roughly 36% of percent positive. Vaccination status, you can see that these numbers continue to tick up. I gave you the overall number of 70% fully vaccinated for all adults. You can see the breakdown by age. Our lowest vaccinated groups are our youngest vaccinated groups, 5 to 11-year-olds now at 18% fully vaccinated, 46% of 12 to 17-year-olds, and then it goes up. So those numbers continue to tick up. But what I would say is that we still have a large portion of the population, especially in those populations from young adults, teenagers, and elementary and middle school age students that are unvaccinated. So that's where we're seeing a lot of the cases. Then you can see the breakdown on the far left by race for fully vaccinated and partially vaccinated or one dose. Another slide I wanted to share with you is just some recent changes about vaccines and the boosters. You can see that breakdown for Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. Just in a nutshell, now you can get for Pfizer or Moderna, you can now get your booster if it's been 5 months, at least 5 months. Before it was 6 months, so that amount of time has been shortened. And just to note that Pfizer is available, is the only one that's approved for 12 to 17-year-olds. 18 plus can get Pfizer or Moderna or Johnson & Johnson. And also that Johnson & Johnson is 2 months since you last received your dose that you can get that booster. And testing, we know that testing is a challenge in the community, and that's not just in Forsyth County, that's in the Triad, across the state and across the nation. Encouraging everyone not to go to the emergency room for a test. Negative testing is not required to return to work, so asking employers not to require that, and working with state and local partners to try to increase testing options in the community. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Joshua, I've got two. On your very first slide, you got that red, high concentration, got state indicator. Is there any county in this state that's not red?
None that I've seen at this point. None that I've seen. We had gotten very close, Dr. Martin, before this recent surge. If you remember when cases were going down, this is late November, early December, we were getting close to that mark for Forsyth County, and there were other counties across the state that were going out of the red, but now it is through the roof. But I can look, but I don't believe there is a county.
And you did not mention the hospital issue. Is the hospitalization? I mean, we've all heard that the Omicron is less severe, in terms of medical impact. Fewer people going to the hospital is obviously is affecting hospital employees and workers. But are we having a growing percentage of people in taking hospital beds that have COVID?
Right now, we haven't noticed a large spike. What I would say is we do need to keep, we're going to monitor that. And that's a great question. One, for the hospitals, they could speak to their staffing levels. I know that they are seeing staff out, just like basically any business is seeing that with staff being out. I know that the hospitals have noticed that. The concern that we have from a public health perspective is, yes, Omicron is more contagious, but it seems to be less severe. So we're curious to see what the next 2 to 3 weeks are, because that's usually the time it takes for after cases have went up, for then if deaths or hospitalizations are going to go up, just because we're dealing with such bigger numbers. So 1% during maybe Delta or other phases of the pandemic, but you had a much smaller number than now, say if it's 0.5% of the population that has COVID, but if you have such higher numbers. We're going to be watching that closely.
Thank you. Other questions for Joshua?
Mr. Swift, the problem from my perspective is people who don't get vaccinated seem to think that they don't need to get vaccinated. But my experience throughout my entire life has been, if you don't have vaccinations, you're probably going to have a problem way down the road, and problems you don't want. What in the world can be done to convince people that you're not being vaccinated to get you sick? You're being vaccinated to keep you well and keep you from spreading it throughout the county. And if I don't miss what I just heard you say, the count for people who are getting COVID comes from people who have not been vaccinated. Is that correct? What's the percentage?
Yes, sir. Well, Chairman, as I noted, what we are seeing is, I'd have to pull up, but basically what we've seen is over 2/3 of the population that are now getting COVID are unvaccinated. So there still is 1/3 of the population that have been vaccinated, so it's a breakthrough case. But what we're seeing is it is much less severe if you've been vaccinated. So will the vaccine, it protects you from COVID, but you still could get COVID. But most likely if you've been vaccinated, and especially if you've got the booster, it's going to be a COVID cold.
And then you've got kids coming along in school, and that could be a whole different story. Am I correct there?
One, yes, sir, Chairman. The children are at risk. We are seeing more children come in to get vaccinated and to get boosters. Appreciate the school system continuing to take a strong stance and requiring masks in the classroom. I think that is helping us, but we are obviously seeing cases among school-age children.
Those are heartbreaking things to talk about. It's heartbreaking no matter how you look at it, but when you get into the elementary grades, good Lord have mercy. Thank you, sir.
Other questions? Thank you, Joshua. Appreciate it. All righty. Our second item for discussion is an inclement weather update from August Vernon. And August, thank you for being with us today.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Let me see if I can share my screen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, can you see my slides that say initial winter weather briefing?
Yes.
Okay, obviously everyone is aware that we have potential for some winter weather this weekend, and within that winter weather, there is potential for some significant winter weather. So there is an increasing forecast confidence concerning a potential winter storm this weekend that will impact the entire region. And we have been tracking that the past few days. The entire region is projected to receive some snowfall, and some areas could see significant accumulation of the snowfall. Also, the confidence in the forecast that we could see mixed precipitation, which obviously complicates the situation, means that we could see also sleet and freezing rain in some areas. And potentially, we could see a combination of all three, which obviously can create challenges. But we still have at least 3 days until this storm impacts us, so there is a lot of uncertainty on timing, locations, and impact. The only certainty is we know we're going to get something. So with this type of event, similar to when we've done hurricane briefings or others in the past, some of the hazards with this are we could see snow, we could see ice, we could see some wind and some gusts with this storm, which obviously could lead to power outages and hazardous travel. And a little note about hazardous travel, a lot of accidents typically occur after the storm and people are traveling at very unsafe speeds for the road conditions. So what are some of the action steps that we have been taking or are taking now and will be taking? Obviously, the Office of Emergency Management, like we typically do. We have been communicating with all our city and county public safety agencies, the hospitals, Duke Energy, and many other partners that we have. We have what we call a battle rhythm of conference calls, and those have started with State Emergency Management and with the National Weather Service. We actually just wrapped up a National Weather Service call, and our first call for this storm with the State Division of Emergency Management occurs in about an hour. Those calls will continue for the next several days as we go through this event. Also, at the local level, our city and county partners will be starting our coordination calls with them and virtual meetings starting tomorrow once that forecast is really tightened up. So we obviously encourage all agencies and departments that we work with to start their planning for this event. And just like we ask our partners to plan, we also ask the public to take some action steps. And we certainly recognize there is what we would call COVID or disaster fatigue, but we do ask that you take the storm seriously. So we have those 3 days. We would ask that everyone starts planning and preparing for potential winter weather. So take advantage of those 3 days that we still have. Once severe weather begins, please stay off the road unless absolutely necessary. I continue to hear stories after these type of events of people that just want to go out and look at what's happened and drive around, and certainly would encourage you not to do that. Allow our emergency response vehicles and DOT and others to do what they need to do. And probably another little safety concern, as we recently saw with the tragedy in New York City. When you lose power, please don't bring a generator inside the house. And when you're using alternative heating sources, please be sure to know how to safely operate them. We have had even tragedies in this county in the past 20 years with alternative heating sources. And I know when people lose power and maybe they get desperate, but those are some of the things you need to start planning for now. So what are those 3 action steps we always ask the public to take, no matter what the hazard, storm, or event is going to be? Just make a plan. Plan now with your family. Plan for your children. If you have elderly parents, pets, look out for your neighborhood, for your community, your church, etc. Make a kit, and that would be a kit that contains all the items that you and your family may need in or after an emergency. And just stay informed. Think of alternate sources beyond using your cell phone, because those can go down or may not work. So typically we would be sending out emergency messages. State and local government, the National Weather Service will send messages out. We could use television, radio, weather radios, social media, and alerts on cell phones as other means. So just think of ways to stay informed. So for more information on overall preparedness, you can go to readyforsyth.org, which is our Winston-Salem Forsyth County preparedness site, or readync.gov, which is the North Carolina Division of Emergency Management preparedness site. And for those that are on social media, you can like and share Ready Forsyth on Facebook and Twitter, and you will get the updates. And the same information that we're receiving, example from the National Weather Service, we will post those on social media so the public can see that. And obviously we ask during the storm to check daily for updated information. Have already got some questions, and I think this slide is kind of important to briefly talk about, and this is really about my last slide, but there's 5 things to know about winter weather forecasts, and we're already seeing this and hearing this. You have to understand that snow or ice totals can vary greatly over very short distances. For Forsyth County, we can have one amount of snow or ice in Rural Hall, a different amount in Kernersville, and a different amount in Clemens. And we may see this with this storm because there's so many different factors in play here. Also, the forecast can change frequently, so always check for updates. We certainly recommend weather.gov from the National Weather Service. And I wouldn't focus too much on, do we have an inch, a quarter inch, a foot, 10 feet? Focus more on the impacts of a storm and not exact amounts, because you may not know the exact amounts until it happens. And understand your winter weather terminology. Right now, we are not under a watch or a warning, but we will potentially see those issued in the next 24 or 36 hours. So understand a difference between a watch, a warning, or an advisory. And probably the last thing, and we've obviously already seen this today, rely only on dependable sources of weather information. The same fact that we would apply to COVID or any other emergency. Only rely on dependable sources for information. I heard an example this morning. If you're someone that wants 10 foot of snow, you could probably go on social media and find models that show that. If you're someone that wants no snow and no moisture, you could probably go on social media and find models that show that. So again, just choose your sources of information very wisely, especially over the next few days. So again, for information, we would encourage the public to visit Ready Forsyth, which is our website, and to follow us on social media and use those trusted sources of information. That is the last slide I have, and I will, I believe I'll stop sharing content. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for August?
I'd say you did a heck of a job. Really good. And 24 to 36 hours, we're going to get the good word, right? And I put that in quotes.
I don't know if I'd call it that, but we'll see what happens.
Any other questions? That was a great summary, August, and I appreciate that, and people can know a lot of places to go to, and it certainly is, at least we do have a few days to get ready. Sometimes we don't, or we're not blessed with those 3 days, so thank you very much for your report.
Thank you, sir.
All righty, our third discussion item today is the auditor's report for the year ending June 30th, 2021. And our CFO, Terry Goodman, will lead that, and she may be joined by Tom McNeish from Elliott Davis, correct?
Yeah, Leanne.
This is Leanne Bakasala. I'm going to speak on behalf of Tom.
Okay.
Terry, were you saying something?
No, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Alrighty, so my name is Leanne Bakasala. I'm a senior manager at Elliott Davis, and I am speaking on behalf of Tom McNeish. He served as a shareholder. He was the one that ultimately signed the audit opinion. But I was heavily involved in the audit as well. As a senior manager, we actually review everything, all audit procedures. So to get started, I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're going to go over. The presentation is only about 10 slides in total. The first thing I want to go through is the required communication. That is the communication as an auditor. We're required to communicate to government, as well as the audit results. There are 4 audit opinions that we issued as part of our procedure. So I'll go through each opinion and what the results were. If anyone has any questions whatsoever, please feel free to ask them at any time. So as part of the package of deliverables that we present from an audit perspective, we do issue your annual comprehensive financial report, which is about a 200-page document. In there, we're only responsible for about maybe 8 or so pieces of paper that has our audit opinion. We also provide a SAS 114 letter, which is a communication to governance. And that is about 30 pages, and that summarizes what I'm going to be presenting on the next couple of slides. In that letter, so on the screen, you have some titles of different sections that are included in that SAS 114 letter. So I'm just going to cover those briefly, but there is more information included in the letter that went to the commissioners. The first thing that we wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of, as your external auditor, we go through a robust process of planning for the audit. We do a lot of meetings internally as well as with finance of the county just to make sure we understand what's happened during the year. As part of that planning process, we determine the nature, extent, and timing of our audit procedures. Based on that planning, we also determine a materiality for the audit. So each fund in your financial statements has all materiality that we determine our procedures based on. We do not audit every single transaction of the county. We use a materiality, and that's a risk-based approach to what do we feel that the users of the financial statements would think is material. As part of our audit procedures, we do go through and test your internal controls. We do process walkthroughs, and we actually test some of the controls. We do that over your general processes like cash receipts, cash disbursement, payroll, journal entry testing. We walk through all the controls, and we will have a comment about one of the controls later in the slides. Also in your letter, it just kind of generally talks about our audit responsibilities, which we will cover when we go over our audit opinions. Your letter also discusses what are the significant accounting policies of the county, which are included in your financial statements. This year, there were no changes in accounting policies that you need to be made aware of, except for the county did implement a GASB standard, which is GASB 84. It's related to fiduciary activities. That's a standard that was required to be implemented this year, so all localities had to implement that. That implementation actually resulted in a restatement of your previous fund balance of about $3.8 million, and that had to do with moving and realigning some of your funds.
Leanne,
Also included in.
Could I interrupt you for one
Yes.
second? Could you make your slide, because you actually have on your display, you actually have the next slide and the current slide. Could you just show the current slide, and maybe it would get a little bigger for those of us a little more visually challenged?
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to do that. I want to see all slides. Oh, that's not it. I actually have two screens on my computer, so I actually see the. Can you see it now?
That's better. That's better. Much better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the next thing I wanted to cover is that in your letter and as part of preparing the financial statements, you do have some management judgments and estimates that are used. And the biggest ones that are probably the most material to everyone is management's estimate related depreciation expense of your fixed assets. And also there is a judgment and estimate made related to your OPEB liability and your pension liability. And those two liabilities are actually determined by an actuary. So while management does have some review of those estimates, those are actuarially determined. Also in your letter, we do, as part of our audit procedures, require to tell you about any unrecorded or corrected misstatements. The trial balance that we received as part of our audit procedures, those are your actual financial figures for your financials. There were no changes to that we had, so there was no corrected misstatements or things that we found that we did not agree with. There was one misstatement that was uncorrected. That misstatement is included in your Appendix B of your letter, but generally you have a EMS consultant that handles the ambulance services. And as part of their procedures at the end of the year, they give management some documentation that helps them determine what should be the ambulance receivable at the end of the year. And when, as part of our audit procedures, we went in, we actually confirmed those balances with your EMS consultant. And it was determined at that time that this was actually very late in the game in December, that the information that they provided to the county was inaccurate. So the county didn't have the most accurate information. And so as part of the discussion, management decided that they were not going to book a journal entry to correct the ambulance receivable, and that correction would have been about $1.2 million. I will say that, just generally looking at an entry that big, people think, well, that is very big. But the actual entry itself it would not cause any financial statement impact because it is an entry to accounts receivable and then an entry to deferred revenue. So it wouldn't actually change your fund balance whatsoever. So management decided not to book that. They determined it was not material, and we were in agreement with that from your auditor standpoint, but we are required to communicate that to you. The next slide is the last slide we have related to your communication with governance. As part of our audit procedures, management does provide us a management representation letter. That letter is included in Appendix A of your letter to governance, and that is very general in respect to just what they're saying, that they're in agreement with a lot of things. As part of our audit procedures, we had no disagreements with management. We are not aware of any consultations that the finance team took with other auditors. We did have some discussion throughout the year about different impacts to standards that were coming out there, in the future related to GASB, but there was nothing that the board needs to be made aware of. And we also did not encounter any difficulties as performing our audit procedures. The finance department, as well as everyone that's handled the grants, such as the Department of Social Services, we worked very well with everybody. We didn't have any issues. And then lastly, as part of our audit procedures, we do need to let you know that we did not identify any material weaknesses as part of our audit, but we did identify 3 significant deficiencies, which we'll cover in just a second. So from an audit opinion standpoint, we issued 4 audit opinions. The first one is opinion over your financial statements. That is the entirety of your financial statements, and as an auditor, we're required to express an opinion of whether those financial statements present fairly in all material respects in conformity with the generally accepted accounting principles. That assurance is reasonable assurance that there's no material misstatements in your financial statements. And we gave an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can give you as auditors. The next opinion we give is opinion over your government auditing standards and basically the county's compliance from an internal controls perspective with government auditing standards. And we gave a clean opinion with the exception of one significant deficiency that we determined related to segregation of duties. If you have your annual comprehensive financial report in front of you, that finding is actually included on page 155. And essentially, we assessed a significant deficiency related to segregation of duties for preparing and approving journal entries. During our review of the financial statements, it was determined there was a couple entries that were posted by the same person. They prepared them and they reviewed them, which from a controls perspective, there should definitely be a segregation of duties, one person preparing and one person approving those. We found that, however, all of the entries that we determined that this happened, they were definitely supported. There was no issues whatsoever that we took with any of the journal entries. They were necessary to prepare the financial statements and to close the books. However, we did want to note that, if you had proper segregation of duties, you would have two different people looking at those entries. And I do believe management has already corrected this. This was a result of just having some limited capacity in the finance department. The next two opinions that we actually give are over your compliance with federal and state programs. That's your grant funding. We audited 6 programs as part of our testing. I think there was 3 federal programs and there was 3 state programs that we audited. And we provided a clean opinion over those grants from a compliance and controls perspective, with the exception of 2 findings. There was one finding related to Medicaid, which is something that most counties have. In all of my experience, I've only seen maybe one county that did not get a finding related to Medicaid one year. But you did receive a significant deficiency related to Medicaid program, and then you also received a significant deficiency related in general to your Department of Social Services related to your ethics, which is your overpayment system where you're going in there and assessing claims against people for maybe giving you fraudulent information or such like that. So those 2 significant deficiencies are included. They start on page 155 of your comprehensive annual financial report. But other than that, all 4 of your opinions are clean with the exception of the 3 significant deficiencies. And each of those significant deficiencies were discussed with management, and they did provide we provided them a recommendation, and they came back with a response. They came back with a corrective action plan of how they will proceed with those findings and correcting those. And the last slide that I have in our presentation is related to performance indicators of concern. So you have the local government commission is very involved in localities in North Carolina, and in the current year they decided to come up with a list of indicators that they wanted the auditor to review as part of our procedures to submit data to them at the end of the year. So we've always had to submit data to them. We have to actually put data in what they call a data input form and submit it to them as part of our finalizing the CAFR. And this year they came up with these indicators on the form that actually automatically calculate for us. I want to make sure that everyone's aware that these are not Elliott Davis's indicators whatsoever, but under the general statute that is on the PowerPoint slide, we are required to communicate those to the council. And basically after they're communicated today, the commissioners have 60 days to provide a response to the LGC for the indicators that are on the screen. And that will be prepared by your finance department. And the new requirement is that all commissioners actually have to sign that response that's going to the local government commission. The three things that the local government commission wants you to address in that letter is the first one is the 2021 fiscal year audit report. So that's your annual comprehensive financial report. It wasn't submitted by the due date of December 1st. And the LGC is aware of the reason why it wasn't submitted by December 1st, and that was related to the implementation of your ERP system that pulled a lot of resources from your finance department. And so the audit was submitted December 21st, 2021, but that was a little late compared to the requirement. So you will have to address that to the LGC, how you're going to fix that going forward. The next item that the LGC will like you to address is that the county did have 2 statutory violations in their comprehensive annual financial report. One of those are on page 32 of your financial statements, and one of them is related to the medical examiner spent more money than they had budgeted at the end of the year. That it was only about $58,000, and that just relates to timing. Basically, you received an invoice later than anticipated. And then also your 2020 housing fund had a fund deficit in the year, and that was really related to accrued revenue that should have been booked at the end of the year to fix that. So you will need to explain those. They are very small in nature, the amount of money that we're talking about, and you'll just have to explain how you're going to fix that going forward. And then the last thing that you need to address is that there were 3 significant deficiencies in your audit report, and you need to explain to the LGC how you're going to fix those going forward. And then, like I said, after that is prepared, all the commissioners will need to sign it and submit it to the LGC within 60 days of today. And that is a new requirement that finance is definitely aware of, because we've had to do multiple trainings on these new requirements. But if anyone has any questions, have no problem answering anything. This is our contact information for me and Tom.
Any current questions right now to Leanne?
Yes.
I was just going to ask if there are any questions of you from this group. I will mention to the public at large is that our audit committee actually met with Leanne, went over this same information, had a little more thorough discussion in that, and talked to our CFO, Terry Goodman. And certainly I think, in fact, Commissioner Linville may want to just comment about our reaction to that, but if you'd like to, Commissioner Linville.
No, I don't have anything to add. They covered it thoroughly, and the deficiencies that was mentioned, finance staff know all about it, and we'll be working on it too, as has been pointed out, to report back and get them in line.
Good. Thank you very much, Commissioner Linville, and thank you, Leanne. We've appreciated working with you the last several years, and we are sorry you're leaving this sort of niche of the woods, Elliott Davis, but we're in the process of preparing an RFP and looking for a new auditor. But anything else you'd like to say? Otherwise, we're finished.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, thank you.
Could I ask Ms. Goodman, you're okay that you can correct all of this? There's nothing here that's a huge concern to you?
No, there's not. We've already actually put into place some corrective actions, and DSS is handling the findings from their area.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you.
Our fourth discussion item today is our Cure Violence Report. I think all of us received a copy of that a day or two ago, and Chantel Robinson and Cure Violence representatives will review it with us now.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioners. And so I have with me today virtually Brent Decker, who is the Chief Program Officer of Cure Violence Global. As you all are aware, the county's Juvenile Crime Prevention Council contracted with Cure Violence to conduct an assessment in an effort to see if this model could be potentially successful in our community in an effort to reduce crime. And so I will turn it over to Mr. Decker to start the presentation.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brent Decker. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at Cure Violence Global. With me, I have two staff members, Arit Johnson and Charles Elliott. So we'll all kind of give the presentation together. Just before we start, the presentation went away. Hold on one second. Let's get this back up here again. Can everyone see the presentation okay?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Great. So, like Chantel said, essentially, we were invited by the County Juvenile Prevention Council to see if the model, the Cure Violence model, which we'll describe in a minute, could be applied to the county. And what the questions we sought to answer with the assessment included. Is there governmental or non-governmental agency with the capacity and will to implement the model with fidelity? Does official or unofficial data exist about the violent incidents that would help us to focus, monitor, and measure the implementation of the model? Does official and unofficial data exist about the nature of violent incidents to determine if the Cure Violence model is appropriate, right? Then we wanted to look at, is there data available to create and identify the highest risk target population for focusing the intervention? We wanted to see if community organizations existed that met the Cure Violence criteria to serve as the implementing partner. We wanted to see if individuals existed who could fulfill the role of violence interrupter and outreach workers. And then we wanted to be able to determine what initial program recommendations would be in terms of program size, budget, recruitment strategies, and ongoing training and technical assistance that would be needed. And so that was the objectives of the assessment process. We started working in about August, I want to say, of last year, so it's been about 4 or 5 months, and we went through kind of 4 phases of work. The first was a series of Cure Violence 101 presentations, and I believe some of you were able to participate in those, and where we really just kind of described the model, the idea behind it, what the model looks like, what are some of the results we've been able to see by using it, and then what the assessment process is. And so that was the phase 1. Phase 2, we kind of had more detailed conversation with key stakeholders around some of the data, around some of the dynamics of the community, et cetera. And then in phase 3, we actually, Arit and another staff member were there in the beginning of December, I believe, to kind of do an on-the-ground assessment, to really visit with the stakeholders, to spend time in the community that's been identified to do the work, meet with some of the community groups, and potentially meet with some potential workers, right? And then phase 4 is where we are now, we've submitted the report and giving a set of presentations just to kind of share what our findings were. But what we were asked to do today, before we get into the findings, is just to talk briefly about the model in case folks didn't have a chance to participate in any of those 101 presentations. So we're going to go through this somewhat quickly, but we wanted to make sure that there's a little context before we get to what the findings were, just so everyone's kind of on the same page. So our program was started by a physician, by an epidemiologist, and he came from the World Health Organization. And the idea of violence as a public health issue kind of dates back to the 70s. And what our founder did is really kind of apply specifically epidemic control under the auspices of public health to community-based violence, right? And what we've seen is, and our understanding of it, is that violence behaves like a contagious disease, like an epidemic, meaning it causes more of itself, right? And if we treat violence like an epidemic, we can get results at a community level, right? And so when we say violence is a contagion, we mean it like literally, right? That there's population characteristics, there's clustering, there's different epidemic waves, and there's a mode of transmission, right? And so if you see in this slide here, we see the clustering effect, right? So this is cases of cholera in Bangladesh. And then next to it, these are cases of violence, shootings, and homicides in the city of Chicago, right? So there tends to be, in all epidemics, a clustering effect, right? It's not evenly distributed across a county or a city. It has, it spreads and follows similar epidemic waves as other epidemics like the flu or even like COVID. I mean, we were just looking at some of these slides earlier. You know, it follows a very similar pattern that there can be no events, but one or two things can happen, and then we start to see a very serious, steep incline, right, of cases. And the third, and I think most important thing from our perspective, is that there's a means of transmission, right? This is not just people born bad acting violently, but there's really what happens in the human brain, and we don't have a lot of time to get into all of this, but really by being exposed to violence, either by observing it, witnessing it, or experiencing trauma, it can fundamentally change the way that we kind of interact with the world and then respond to conflict. And so what we see, you know, at a community level, there are many kind of methods of exposure. So you can be exposed to violence from the community, right? Either gang, crew, clique, things. There can be interpersonal violence. There could be civil war, things of this nature. The media has exposure, the family, school, state-sanctioned violence, and the institutional violence we see. And all of these things can affect an individual and then lead to more outcomes. And so what we see in areas where there's a lot of violence is we see this kind of cycle of multiple exposures leading to multiple events, leading to multiple exposures, leading to multiple events, right? And this is what we see in a lot of areas like where it has kind of persistent levels of violence. The one thing that, in terms of a public health perspective on this, I mean, we understand and think there are social determinants of health, of any health indicator that are important, that have to do with structural racism, colonialism, things of this nature. This is not necessarily the focus of our program, but we do want to raise up that those are important things that, you know, many communities, many organizations, many governments are struggling with and trying to really address some of those further up the stream kind of issues. We think all that is very important. It is not the focus of this specific intervention, right? We're trying to stop shootings and killings today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. But we do understand that this happens in a context, right? And it's important that those voices that are talking about those larger issues are listened to and taken into consideration in terms of the policy. But in terms of violence being an epidemic, in a sense that this is good news because we know how to stop epidemics, right? It's to do three things, right? We interrupt the transmission, prevent future spread, and change group norms, right? And so from that, we've created the Cure Violence model. And so I'm going to hand this off to Arit just to briefly kind of go through the three components of the model. We can start with interrupting the transmission and what that looks like.
Sure. So, thank you, Brent. Initially, how we want to interrupt the transmission is we use our violence interrupters. And the violence interrupters are what I like to call the secret sauce of this model because they're the boots on the ground. And what their essential job responsibility is they develop relationships with influential individuals in the communities. So they target the drivers of violence. They refer potential participants to the outreach workers to develop their caseload. They get ahead of the violence before it actually starts. So they have a pulse on the community. And how do they have a pulse on the communities? Because they actually, used to be some of those guys and girls who used to be the drivers of violence. So these guys and girls are credible, and they're suitable as well. And we move to the next phase of the model. And like I kind of mentioned before, is the violence interrupters, they refer the participants, if they're willing to, the outreach workers. And the outreach workers, for a lack of a better word, are kind of like case managers. They have 15 up to 15 participants, high-risk participants, not just at risk, but the highest risk. So once the violence interrupters, bring them in and the participants agree to become on the caseload, then they refer them to the outreach worker, where they can then develop a risk needs assessment, and then they can work on their goals. They can, they can continue to work with them in changing some of these behavior norms. So they can teach them different behavior skills to address some of the things that they were going through beforehand. And then we move to the last phase, which is the change in the norm change. So once we allow the violence interrupters, the outreach workers, to kind of do their thing, in this model, what happens is the norm begins to change. So, we begin to see that it's not okay for individuals to shoot, and kill for, any reason, but the reasons that these people are getting shot and killed now. So we're able to change those norms because you try to talk to my girlfriend, you stepped on my shoe, or this community and this community, this person over here don't like this person because of that. We're able to change these community norms, through pub ed material, through which we see here, canvassing. We see the pub ed material. We're able to get out and take these communities back and let the community know that we're not going to stand for this type of violence, and we're changing this norm as well. So, and here what you guys see again is just some pub ed material that's very useful in taking back these communities. Once a lot of these don't shoot, I want to grow up. You see those plastered in hot spots. It begins to do something different to the mindset, and people get to start to see, okay, stop killing people. There's different ways to do that. So we're effective in that way like that. You can go to the next slide, Brent. I think that might be it. Yep. So that was my part. So those are the three prongs of the model: the violence interrupters, the outreach workers, and then with changing community norms by the pub ed, canvassing, and things like that. So those are the three prongs, and I'm going to pass it now to my colleague, Charles, to talk about the independent evaluation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak about the evaluations that have been done on cure violence. You can go to the next slide. So there's been a lot of evaluations. I think right now there's been over 18 different types of evaluations done by various agencies around the world. On this slide, you can see the evaluations done in Chicago, Illinois in 2008 by Northwestern, which was performed by Wesley Scogan and colleagues. Scogan and colleagues found that there was a reduction in shootings and killings by over 41 to 73% in over 6 or 7 different communities in Chicago. In 2012, there was a evaluation done by the CDC and Johns Hopkins University performed by Daniel Webster, who is one of the leading researchers in gun violence prevention in the United States. He found that there was a 56% reduction in Baltimore in the killings that were happening there. Later on in 2015, Dr. Jeffrey Butts and colleagues from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and through collaboration of the Office of the Mayor in NYC, found that New York City's shootings were reduced by 63%. Next slide. So just a little more detail about Northwestern and the business in Chicago. In Auburn Gresham, 28% of the area was a hotspot with 261 to 322 shootings per square mile, so very hot area. But after ceasefire, 13.5% of the area was a hotspot, and that's a 52.5% reduction. So just to clarify, ceasefire was the name of Cure Violence Global's program before it became Cure Violence Global, and we were able to establish the change as an international organization. Next slide. So in Englewood, another neighborhood of Chicago, 73% of the area was a hotspot with 261 to 322 shootings as well per square mile. But after a ceasefire, there was a 0% of the area was a hotspot. That was a 100% reduction. Next slide. So Auburn, Gresham, Englewood, Logan Square, Rogers Park, Southwest, West Garfield Park, etc. These were all community sites that were established through the evaluation, as well as through the ceasefire program. You can see the difference in some of the results here. Nonetheless, there's been over 26% on average reduction in Chicago of shootings as in terms of the evaluation that was performed by Northwestern. There was almost 100% reduction in many communities for reciprocal murders as evaluated by Scogan and colleagues. Next slide. So the success in Baltimore also reflects the success found in Chicago. So there were 3 sites here that were mainly oriented in the implementation period that was measured by the evaluation. Safe Streets was the name of the program. It had a larger effect on reducing non-fatal shootings, almost a 25% reduction, than any of the other comparative law enforcement agencies. So the point estimates for site-by-site effects show that the reductions in each site, the largest being Cherry Hill, which was a 43% reduction in that amount of time. That's a fairly strong amount of time for there to be such a strong reduction. So typically what we see is with these results, they kind of get closer and closer to the mean value of change, but this looks like it's kind of spreading, so it looks really good for Cherry Hill. So the point estimates of the program effects by site show positive outcomes in the 3 sites, Cherry Hill at -42, McElderry at -33, and Lower Park Heights at -47. So next slide. So similarly, just like the other 2 cities, New York City had a very strong reduction in violence. You can see over the course of time from 2014 to 2016, SOS in the South Bronx and Man Up in Brooklyn reduced gun injuries by 37 to 50%, as well as shooting victimizations from 63 to 15%. So anywhere between that area, some of these sites operated quite differently, but they obviously were still able to reduce shootings based on their target area. So I want to also make claim that Cure Violence doesn't just look at our own target areas and treatment effects and say this is good. We also have the counterfactual evidence to support us. So when we look at comparison areas compared to the site areas where Cure Violence was hosted, we also see larger reductions in the treatment areas than in the comparison areas. So in the comparison areas, there was no Cure Violence program such as Flatbush. And then in East New York, we see a large reduction where there was a Cure Violence program. Same we see in South Bronx versus East Harlem, and the same in other cities as well. This is only just a few of the examples that we can offer you in terms of the evidence that supports the program. So we also have a lot of information on evaluations that have happened overseas. This particular evaluation occurred in Trinidad by Arizona State University. Ed McGuire was the lead author in this evaluation. Based on a series of quasi-experimental designs using 3 independent data sets collected by both internal and external sources, we examined the impact of the Project Reason, which was the name of the site there in Trinidad. They found that the Cure Violence intervention was associated with a significant and substantial reduction of violence. There were over 16 intervention communities involved in this project. So you can see over the course of the time that the Cure Violence site was up in Trinidad. ASU found that right after the intervention of the program, you see a giant decline in the amount of time, and I'm assuming those are months. So there was 31 months that the program was up. There's a large amount of time where violence was kind of going up and down, spiking, and then after the program launched, there was a giant reduction in violence over the course of that time. So recently, we've done an evaluation in Cali, Colombia. We've had great cooperation from the Interdevelopment Bank and ICSE. The intervention area 1 was in Charco Azul. We found a 47% reduction in homicides overseas. We also found a 47% less likely experience to retaliatory homicides. So these are retaliations by gang members primarily, as compared to control areas again. So we're looking at the counterfactual when we look at these studies. Intervention area 2 was in Comuneros. We found a 30% reduction in homicides, as well as 100% less likely to experience retaliation homicides. That's a very, very large number for such a very dangerous city. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Charles. And so that was just, so thank you, Avery and Charles. We just wanted to give some context in terms of the program and some of the evidence. The last thing I wanted to say before we go into the assessment process is I want to talk about data and information sharing, because this has come up a lot during the assessment, and we just wanted to make sure it was part of the conversation here. So from a public health perspective, when we do this work, we have a database that tracks all of our indicators, but we do not use names, we do not use addresses, we don't use names of like crews and cliques or anything like that. We might have a birth year in there, but no birth dates. We don't want any kind of information that would compromise an individual's kind of identity, right? And so that's very, I think, a very basic and fundamental practice in public health, and particularly in epidemic control, and particularly in violence prevention. So we don't share names or information about any of the participants we're working on or any of the mediations we're working on with anybody. This includes law enforcement, health and family services. We do this in a way that's HIPAA compliant. and that keeps the bond of trust between the workers who are working with a high-risk population to be able to serve as mediators and those who can intervene in the program. And I know this came up a bunch in the assessment meetings, but just to be clear about it, we don't share information with anyone about the participants that we're working on. We share out information in terms of number of mediations, and it becomes part of like a dashboard that talks about the kind of proactive work that we've done, but we would never share kind of case-by-case information with anybody. We want just to make that clear because it did come up quite a few times in the conversation. So going to the assessment findings, so for the first question about the will and capacity locally, and so we really found that the county and the city had extremely high levels of capacity, will, and potential commitment to implementing the model. I mean, there was a significant amount of time and resources spent in the assessment. There was actually a Cure Violence Steering Committee that was created that had, and it's in the report, I mean, really a broad cross-section of different departments and agencies that met on a very regular weekly basis. Some of the meetings were 2 hours long. There was just an extreme amount of engagement, and I think through the committee, which represented both the county and the city, we were able to really see we were able to convene a kind of a diverse set of county, city, community, hospital, and individual stakeholders. And this is critical for when we're thinking about, can this program be helpful or not? To be able to see that capacity was great. And also then the county has kind of identified American Rescue Act resources to potentially fund the program if you all decide to move forward with it. The second question, in terms of data, both official and unofficial, we really found that the county and the city exceeded the data requirements for the Cure Violence model to be successful. So this was both provided by the police department as well as the sheriff's department, shooting and homicide data, incident level data, mapping capabilities, and also kind of multi-year baselines. And so all the data requirements to really measure this program's impact do exist in the county and the city, and so that was a resounding yes for us. We really did appreciate both the police department and the sheriff being able to share some of that information so we could really think about where the best place would be to implement this model. And so if we look at the kind of questions 3 and 4, I mean, what we're really able to see is that the area 222 specifically where the hotspot was, with a couple areas within there that would make the most sense to do it, but that was really the hotspot when we looked at shootings and killings, and this really over the past couple years. And I think in the conversations in the community with various stakeholders, really confirmed that that was an area that if we were to start a program, it would make the most sense to do it. And the dynamics, meaning the things leading to violent events there, were consistent with other places the model has been successful. So it wasn't like something that was outside of the experience of Cure Violence Global's partners across the U.S. specifically and globally as well. And so we felt strong that was good and this could potentially be helpful. Did community partners exist that could met the criteria to implement? And so you can see on here, and it's in the report, there's kind of a series of things to think about in terms of selection of who is best suited to do this, to implement this model. And I won't go through every point of it, but what we found is, yes, we felt like that there were organizations in the community that met the criteria, and so in the 222 area, there was a number of organizations, there's a couple ways we could do it in terms of implementing through an existing community-based organization, a community-based organization that has a potential fiscal agent, or potentially through the health department. So there was a number of options that were available that we have seen in other cities and other counties work. Also, what was a really great part of the assessment is having a chance to meet with the hospital. And we felt like that the hospital-based part of the model, that it doesn't happen in every city, there's certain conditions have to exist. We really felt like there is an opportunity here to do that. And there's kind of a couple ways that the hospital-based program can be linked with the community-based violence prevention stuff. It's either that the hospital responders work for whoever the agency is doing implementation and respond to the hospital, or they work directly for the hospital, respond to cases, and then coordinate with the community-based violence intervention strategy. So there's a couple ways to do it. Again, that needs to be decided locally, but we felt like all of the kind of criteria and local capacities existed to be able to do this. And then the last question of like, do individuals exist that could serve as violence interrupters and outreach workers? And what AREIT was saying is this is a kind of a new category of worker, right? These are folks from those areas, from the Area 222, that have relationships in the areas where violence is taking place, have a high level of credibility, right, and are able to intervene and to use that credibility and those relationships to get in front of violent events before they occur, or if something does happen, prevent retaliation. And so we felt, pretty strongly that that those individuals did exist, and that if the county city does move forward with this, that we would be able to recruit workers. There's a couple points on this slide. I don't want to go through every single one of them, but there is a whole process in which workers are recruited, screened, and then hired. And, this is a big part of what makes this model so effective, is getting the right workers that are both credible, with the highest risk, but also suitable for doing the work. And so there's kind of a whole process through that. So if the county does decide to do that, there is a mechanism that's been effective in other settings. So in terms of the kind of the program recommendations, all things considered, we kind of felt like that this would be, given the number of violent events, the shootings, given some of the dynamics, this would be kind of a medium-sized program of between 8 to 9 staff to cover the target area. The estimated budget you can see there is between $564,000 to about $600,000 for the first year. It depends. In the report, we gave kind of some ballpark numbers in terms of what a budget could look like. There's a couple of like local considerations to think through that we've talked and expressed with the committee, the steering committee, to kind of go through it. The hospital-based program, if we decide to do that as well, they're thinking a staffing pattern between 4 and 5 at about $230,000 a year, more or less, to cover that. Again, these are just ballpark numbers. And then, if we're to work with the county and city moving forward, they asked what our budget was, and it really just depends on what the overall scope of the project would be. Our costs are usually around between 15 and 20%. It just kind of depends on a couple of factors. So again, just to kind of to go through again, we really felt like that we felt that the answer was yes to all of our kind of assessment questions, and that if the county and city see this as part of what they want to do, as part of your kind of comprehensive violence prevention strategy, we think that it can be helpful, and there is a possible for making a difference in terms of shootings and killings. So with that, we can stop and take any questions.
Thank you. Chantel, did you want to add anything?
The only thing I would add is that, the city of Winston-Salem was looking at the cure violence model really around the same time we were doing so. And so they have also been very involved in this assessment process. During their ARPA process, they set aside some funds for cure violence specifically of $200,000. But there is a will, if their board decides to move forward, to potentially fund a little bit more. And in the state budget, there's $500,000 for a hospital-based violence intervention program, and both hospitals are very interested in moving forward with this type of model as well.
I actually have several questions, but I want to ask if there's anybody like to start before I ask some. Just open it up.
Go ahead.
A couple of general questions on the research side, and I appreciate you sharing those results, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding the results. So in the slide that you had with I think there were 3 big, fairly large studies. Baltimore was one, where you had fairly large percentages declines. I'm assuming that was in those individual neighborhoods. So it was the neighborhood that you were working in. It wasn't for the whole community. It wasn't Baltimore. It was for the cure violence area that you were working in Baltimore. Am I correct about that?
Yes, sir, you're correct about that.
So the very issue I think I brought up in an earlier meeting with your folks here, the visiting team, is that because what apparently is the case in our next door neighbor, Guilford County, is that they had results reductions in the neighborhood, but the overall number of shootings, et cetera, in the county remain pretty much the same. And the answer I got for that was, well, you know, crime's going up, and so it's going up in other neighborhoods, and so it washes out the success of what's going on in cure violence. So essentially, there was not a reduction in the county, but there was a reduction in the one area or two or three that where the cure violence sessions were going. And I guess I probably am not particularly pleased with that answer. And I will mention that it struck me both from our meeting as well as, in fact, our district attorney sent me a study that I'm gonna, or it was actually a fairly long article that quotes several studies, and I'm gonna mention that in a minute, but it did strike me a little bit that if cure violence is successful, then law enforcement should be extremely happy that you have been successful and extremely happy that public dollars have purchased a program that reduced shootings and crime. I mean, that would be something of happiness. However, you know, our sheriff actually has reported in the meeting with you all that he has spoken with Guilford County and has spoken with folks in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and has spoken with people in Chicago. And they're law enforcement folks that he's spoken with. And their results are not very positive. And that somewhat bothers me. And quite frankly, I didn't get much of an answer to that observation or a response when we brought it up. And so before I go on, let me give you an opportunity to respond to that.
What was your question, sir?
So I'll take the first part of it.
I think you understand the question.
Yeah, I understand. I kind of understand the general thing. So I think, so the reason that cure violence is not county and citywide is that it hasn't been invested in. And so it's not our decision like that we'd only want to cover a certain small part of it. And so the answer to restate it, in other cities where there's been an increase, it has not increased in our areas. And so I don't know that I articulated it as a wash. I don't think it was a wash. I think the overall number would have been higher for the county if the interventions didn't take place in those specific areas. Okay. And so, you know, so I apologize if we misarticulated that, but that's not the case. And so the violence, the overall violence would have been higher had those programs not existed. And secondarily, I mean, in cities and countries we're working in, the objective is to have these county-wide, right? It's not just to do it in one area. In the case of, until recently, there really hasn't been the amount of resources devoted to do kind of a full health system, public health system, to do implementation on a larger scale. And so we too are frustrated with the lack of sufficient funding to do county, city, and statewide programming. So you wouldn't hear us disagreeing with that at all. In terms of law enforcement and buy into the program, I can't really speak to that. I mean, I would say we're not a law enforcement focused organization. We're a public health based thing. I'm not sure exactly what all the critiques might be, but from our perspective, you know, really understanding this from a health perspective, we have to have multiple kind of safety nets around the community, right? And it's not just an issue of law enforcement. It's not just an issue of education. It's not just an issue of economics. It is an issue also of health and public health. And so I can't speak to whatever the critiques are of our model, but I wouldn't just assume because it's positive, because we've been successful, necessarily the police or the firemen or whoever are happy about it, you know? And so I don't know, I'm not sure that I follow the logic in that completely, but I understand what you're saying.
Well, let me see if I can explain it better. If we had a program in public health and in our Department of Social Services that engaged social workers, for example, with special training, in fact, it could be your training, for example, and if they were out and actually had a program, whatever they did, and they noticed a reduction in crime in those areas, I think that our law enforcement folks would say, gosh, that's a great program. Man, look how well that worked over in XYZ community, and we need to do more of that. I mean, that's something that's really important. So I think law enforcement would like that. And I don't understand why law enforcement doesn't like the results that you're getting, because they're claiming they're kind of bogus. And I think your answer earlier that crime and shootings would have been worse if the Cure Violence neighborhood had not been interrupting violence in that neighborhood. There's no proof to that. You don't know that the bad actors didn't just move out of one neighborhood into another. We got into this a little bit at the meeting, and one of our assistant district attorneys said, holy cow, the people that we're prosecuting, they're not just in one small two couple square miles. They're kind of bad acting in a whole lot of other places too. It's not just, there's no fence around it. So you can't make that conclusion from your studies.
I don't think that's correct. I don't think so. We can say that. We can say that. Well, this program is pushing the violence elsewhere, but I've yet to see a study or an evaluation or anything presented that has any hard evidence to substantiate that claim. And in fact, we've asked, and so and in fact, some of the evaluation done by criminologists, et cetera, Scogan, the Webster stuff, it says it doesn't have a dispersion effect. And so folks can have any opinion they'd like to have about it and can disagree about it, but if that is the case and there's been an actual scientific evaluation or study demonstrating that, then I think we can consider it.
All right.
And so that's where we're kind of yes, I could say many different things. And again, I'm not trying to be argumentative with you. I'm just saying this has been said a couple of times, but we have to bring some evidence to substantiate it. I think if we're talking about health and science and how the county's going.
All right. So that's a perfect segue into at least the article our district attorney sent to me. And it's published it's an online publication called Vox.com. And it's a very lengthy article, and it does have citations. Then, in fact, one of them, I'm going to just read you the first. I didn't look. I'm not going to give you all of them, and I don't have them all. It's a very long article, but this one paragraph begins and says, the research on interrupters, quote, is mixed, incomplete, and very difficult to do, unquote. And that was stated by Jeffrey Butts, a researcher at John Jay College. One of the studies you studied, I'm sure it's not the same study, probably not the same author, because there have been many. And he says at the college, and he says, Justice, who has studied the interrupters throughout. Plus, there's a fairly long article in the Annual Review of Physical Health. It's a 2015 article. It goes into some detail of citations of kind of mixed results studies. And you don't seem to acknowledge, or maybe if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't either, but there are some folks out there that are not being as positive about your results as you are. And to acknowledge that there are researchers that are raising questions about success. And it gives an example, and I believe in the Annual Review of Public Health, I believe they talk about a Pittsburgh example. And it was, according to that, just my memory on that it was not successful at all. And obviously they're going to be, anytime you're hiring people in different places, lots of programs, there are going to be some more successful programs and some that aren't. And I understand that, and you've had a lot of experience in a lot of places. But I don't sense an acknowledgement that this may not be the end-all be-all that basically I think some of our folks think it is. And I want us to, everyone, in fact, even in this article, it acknowledges the fact that in 2021 and 2022, government leaders particularly, everyone is we're looking to do something. Shootings are on the rise. Everyone wants to do something. And it's just, is this just a convenient thing so we can say we're doing something? And so there are some opposing views out there, and with some, I don't know if you're familiar with that article, but if you're not,
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned.
Yeah.
Brent, could I comment on this
Please.
briefly? Yeah, so absolutely, sir. I think what you're saying is 100% true. There's not a single person at Cure Violence that does not acknowledge what you're saying. I think as a PhD in international conflict, as someone who studies scientific research every day, almost all day of my life, I think that there is not a single scientific study in the entire field of violence prevention that does not have some kind of mixed result. So I'm just going to put that out there plainly. I've never seen a study where there's perfect results. I've never seen a study where everything happens perfectly. There's always going to be caveats and limitations to every scientific study that's committed through the public health agenda as well, including epidemiological studies where the models are just still being hashed out today, especially models from over 30 years ago. So I think that's an important point to make. And to Brent's point, I think it's hard to comment on criticisms where we don't know what those are. And I think I've spoken to Jeffrey Butts many times, and we both agree. And I think many at Cure Violence agrees. There's always a way to make the programs better through implementation, through cooperation from agencies and local government, through better scientific research studies evaluating these programs that are more rigorous and have better controls, through improving counterfactual evidence. So all of these things we're trying desperately to do. But just like Brent said, it's challenging with little funding. So we're trying to assure you, sir, that the program, it does work. It has had mixed results. We accept that. We acknowledge that. We don't want to paint the picture that we don't.
Well, thank you for doing
And the
that.
other thing I would add, specifically about the Pittsburgh, is read the Pittsburgh Review. They specifically say in their paper that they didn't do the Cure Violence model. So that, it becomes complicated on some of these things.
And I understand fidelity of implementation. I got you. And let me say this, and I will sort of, I'm going to wrap this little part. I probably got some. If we get to there are some weeds questions I probably have, but I may back off of that for the moment. But let me just say this, and you can try to help me understand this. So a good result for us is if we reduce shootings in this one area that's been identified, that's on the map, the 222. So we're successful. We may or may not have success in our county at large, and we'll sort of acknowledge that. The question becomes, how long? It's a two-part question. It's that, do we have to continue? How long? This is our folks have discussed with us the idea of a 2-year project. So we're looking at, basically, $1.5 million to $1.5 million total. And that's for 2 years. And we may get these results in area 222, which is a few square miles of our 450. So I'm trying to get a handle on how long would that project, would it have to continue forever? I mean, do you have to have violence interrupters forever? Do the cultural norms and behaviors eventually change so that area 222 is better and it stays better? Yeah. And the second part is, in order to reduce crime and shootings in the whole county, do we have to have 15 cure violence programs, or 10 cure violence programs that are going to end up costing, $5 million a year kind of issue? I'm just trying to get at big picture, where do you kind of go, even if we have some fairly good results in 222, what does that mean for the future?
Yeah.
Brent, I can answer the first question really easily.
Sure.
Yeah, so to the point of norm change, all of those studies, even the study that you cited with Jeffrey Butts, with the mixed review, actually has a strong indication, a really well done, strongly thought out analysis, right, on how norms were changed in those communities. And they accepted the fact that cure violence does change norms. So in the short time that those programs ran, in Jeff Butts' case, 2 years, there was a substantial changing of norms. I'm not going to go deep into the paper. Like you said, it's a really long paper. I don't blame you. But I can admit, based on non-biased evidence from external researchers, from 4 to 5 different studies where they measured the actual changing of norms through, surveys or, random assignment or all these different things, they were able to establish that the norms did change in the amount of times that the cities planned the programs. We understand that those are different cities. They might not be Winston-Salem's norms, but we assure you that we will measure the norm change and we will look at the differences between norms before and after the program began and ended.
To the second part of your question, I'm sorry, go ahead. If you had a follow-up.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll follow up.
Yeah. So what I think what we would recommend, what the CDC would recommend, what other is recommend that this becomes part of the way that the county does business long term. So we wouldn't look at this as just a 2-year program. If we're able to implement this and really focus in on reducing just in the area 222, then we would map out, like other cities have done, what are all the other hotspots, and to have kind of an ongoing program as part of either the health department or whatever, as a way that we address violence to, really make a decrease in sustained reduction in it. So we don't see this as a program. I mean, we think about this as a public health issue, as part of the way that the county and city would continue to address violence. In terms of the funding, what typically happens is, you have like an initial kind of high level of intervention, but then as violence goes down, some of the staffing patterns can change, areas can change. But what we're recommending, globally speaking, not just in the counties, is this would be something, if it becomes effective and becomes part of the strategy of the way the county does business. And if we look at even how much one shooting costs, overall, what I mean? I mean, I think it really, it fails in comparison in terms of what we would think about as a countywide program budget versus how much, even one shooting, when you think about medical, legal, well, I mean, the costs aren't even comparable. So, I mean, I think that, but yeah, the vision would be that this would be something that would be an ongoing part if it's found to be effective, if the county and city, if it just kind of fits into the broader strategy. That's what a lot of cities have done, is it becomes part of their way in which they're addressing it long term.
So
another thing I'd like to add, if I could please, to what you said earlier about the kind of the efficacy of the programs reducing, long term. I think it's important to recognize that even with, one reduction in one person's life being saved, that's a big deal to me. And personally, I think that's a very big deal. And I make a strong appeal to everybody I talk to, not just because I work for Cure Violence, because I'm dedicated to violence prevention, that, if we can save one life, we're doing our jobs, right? And I think it's important to me personally, but I also think it should be important as a cooperative thing. And I think you said earlier something about end-all, be-all solutions. I think we are just one tool the city can use to help stop people from dying. So that's just what I wanted to say as an add-on to what Brent was saying.
And Vice Chairman Martin, I just want to provide one point of clarification. We are hoping that this would be a 3-year pilot through ARPA funds. Certainly, it'll depend on when we're able to begin implementation and how long we can spend the ARPA dollars. But our goal would be a 3-year pilot. The Juvenile Crime Prevention Council allocates dollars that they receive each year, and we are always trying to make decisions on programs that are evidence-based. And so we do have some funding for sustainability, if this is something that the board approves and it's something that we feel like would help the community. So that is a potential source as well.
So one last big picture question for you all. And that is, so there are some communities, as I'm hearing, that have had multiple years, I'm going to say 10 years of experience with Cure Violence, doing exactly kind of what Chantel, our Deputy County Manager, is suggesting. We would do 3 years, and we may be able to continue with other funds, spending $600,000 a year roughly. So after 10 years, and if the cultural norms are changed, then we should expect in 10 years that we would have some reductions. So I just want to know, is there some place that, and you've been doing this since the 90s in various forms, so you must have some places maybe that have done 10 years, and can they point to a reduction over a 10-year period that has shown, yeah, man, we're showing some countywide statistics kind of issues? Because it just, I'll stop there, but that's the big question.
Charles, would you like me to take that, or?
Yeah, I'd be glad to answer the question. Absolutely.
Go ahead,
You know, yeah, the answer is absolutely. I think there are many programs that have came and gone, or programs that have ran for a very long time. I think one that comes to mind is Baltimore, and they've seen reductions in norm change, like that violence is a norm. It is acceptable to solve your problems using a weapon, right? They've seen a huge reduction. Like I think it's up to 73% in many communities. But I think in terms to your just static quantitative reduction of has the shootings gone down, that's always a variant factor. It's fluctuations. It's like trying to decide whether it's going to snow really badly in Winston-Salem in a week, right? It can be challenging to measure it.
Yeah, but in the areas we've worked long term, they have seen, pretty significant. Again, the issue that gets cloudy here is in the areas that we're working in, right? It's not citywide, and so as cities are now putting more and more of these programs in, then that's yet to see it to be put to scale. So yeah, I mean, I think you could talk to Baltimore, New York, Washington D.C. You can talk with. Now, San Antonio hasn't been around 10 years, but there's a couple that have been around for a couple of years that you could talk to their local governments and see how they perceive this as being helpful to their overall numbers. Even in last 2 years, I mean, like Jacksonville, Atlanta, and I'm trying to think of one other one. The area in St. Louis, all saw big increases because of, the COVID and all the unrest that was going on. They didn't see the same increases in the target area, and that, and so, again, this is cities finding this to be useful and counties finding this to be useful as part of their broader violence prevention strategies.
So, and I'll just pick Baltimore. So if I just want to ask this question. So if we called, the Baltimore police chief, surely he's going to know you've been there a long time, you've had success, you've measured norm changes there. Is a Baltimore police chief going to think cure violence would he say, I'd really recommend that you do that? Would he?
I don't know if that's the right question. I would call the mayor, I would call the health department, I would call the mayor's office of criminal justice. I think those are the folks to ask in terms of the broader strategy.
Okay, well, I hear you. I'm just a little concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I would say call the mayor. That's what I would say. To call.
Or you can call the external evaluators that don't have any chip in the game, so to speak, who have done the evaluation.
That's probably the one, because the mayor put money into this thing and he didn't want to look like he messed up. I said, what am I doing here? Of course I did a great job. I know what I'm doing. I understand all that.
No one.
Maybe some, like the call, that might be a helpful thing. But I also think, it's kind of back to my perception issue. If we had a program with social workers and health department workers, and we were noticing a reduction in crime, and I think our sheriff and police chief would say, hallelujah, whatever you guys are doing, let's try to do more of that. They'd say, that's great. I mean, I can't imagine a police chief or a sheriff not interested in seeing a reduction in shootings in their jurisdiction. I mean, so I don't think, why should they care how it happens unless they're just selfish about competing for resources? Now, I understand all those kind of things, but I'd like to think that people are better than that. I mean, I'd like to think law enforcement's better than that, because we certainly rely on them in a lot of ways. So, I mean, that may be some interesting pursuits, but maybe you could send to Chantel some of the people who did the research that's done your research in Baltimore, and that might be a good way for us to do a little pursuing. That might be good. I apologize for taking so long to our group and with you all, and I'm going to hold my questions off on the in the weeds questions part of it, but until perhaps another day. But thank you for your acknowledging the mixed issues that are going on in you know, that was helpful. Thanks.
Yep. Hey, Commissioner, before you go, I just wanted to add this piece, just for context, right? A lot of the people, the individuals in these communities, they're black and they're brown. And, you know, it's a lot of talk about the police and if they would be happy. I would just be interested, what would the black and brown people say about the police, you know, in these communities where cure violence is, right? Would they like or approve of cure violence? You know, people from the community interrupting the violence? Or would they approve of some of these same law officers that had been interrupting violence in these communities for decades and had not been going favorable for those individuals that are black and brown in these communities? You know, so as a black man, I kind of, you know, we love the police. We're not anti-police at all. But we get a bad rap, you know, as an alternative in our own communities. And police who have, you know, documented, you know, we can look at history over time and over time and over time, have done things in these communities to these same people that look like me, sir. You know, in 223, they look like me, you know. And the people who can solve the issues in Winston-Salem, they look like me because they are some of the same drivers of the violence, right? You guys have what you need in Winston to solve the shootings and the killings, because the drivers of violence can be reached by credible messengers, you know, and that are suitable. So when we're talking about the police, I just want to keep that in mind as well. You know, we talk about these communities and we talk about being accepted. And when we talk about what would the police think or what would the police say about a program like this, let's look at the individuals that are getting killed every day. What would they say about the police?
Yeah, I hear you, but I do just want to say that our police chief and our sheriff look like you. I want to make that point too.
Mr. Chairman, could I have 30 seconds?
Sure, please do.
I'm going to try to keep this to 30 seconds too, because I've been working with this group since August. And we started off trying to find a program that was evidence-based that could really have a verifiable difference in our community when it comes to violence. And we did due diligence before we identified this Cure Violence group as an option. I mean, thorough due diligence, because we did not have the kind of improvements we wanted to have in our community with other programs. On a transparency note, I was the one that took these guys around the city to show them those communities in what we call now 222, to get my own impression of their commitment to this idea of violence being a disease. Now, if you remember, Commissioner Martin, they started off saying why they don't share information as a part of a principle. So if they're not sharing information with the sheriff's department or the police department, they wouldn't have any idea of their success. Now, I know the sheriff down in Wake County and in Guilford County, et cetera, but they don't have the information that these guys would have who run the program. So that's like apples and oranges to one degree. To ask them to assess a program they're not getting information on, because that's part of the principal operation. So I'm going to conclude with just saying that from what I have seen since August, they're a very viable group. They're not going to solve the county or the city at whole, but they will solve problems in that community, and to me, it's worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Elneny. Any other comments?
I have some questions and whatnot, but we've spent so much time on this. I would like to see us talk about here in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County next week. I have questions for staff. I don't have any further questions from these guys, but I do have some concerns and some questions.
And Mr. Vice Chairman, I do, just for the point of clarification, the police chief is supportive of trying an alternative method. So she certainly has concerns about not sharing with law enforcement, and she's been clear about that. But, I mean, I will quote, she said, you know, I have dead bodies in Winston-Salem, and who am I to not try something different? And so the police chief is supportive of the program, and the public safety chair, Councilmember James Taylor, has been part of this steering committee and told the Cure Violence group yesterday, again, without us saying anything unsolicited, that we want you here. So I'm just saying that for point of clarification. At the end of the day, this is an elected official decision. I really am trying to stay neutral, but I do want to make sure that our elected body is clear on what individuals are saying.
Well, maybe that's one of my questions. If the city is so involved in this and so supportive of it, I don't understand why their funding is not a little bit more. When that map shows 222, that's 100% right in Winston-Salem. But yet Forsyth County is paying the larger share of it, and I don't understand that.
So we have not solidified anything on funding with the city. Prior to Cure Violence conducting their assessment, when they were just thinking about this, they set aside $200,000. They had no idea what the cost would be. What I've been told by the city is that once they receive the assessment report, they would then decide if there would be more funding that they would put towards it. And so where they are is Cure Violence staff will provide a report, just like they're doing today, to the Public Safety Committee. And as you all know, they are bound by committees before it goes before council. Their next Public Safety Committee meeting is in February, and that is what Councilmember James Taylor oversees. And if their committee recommends the model, then it will go before their full city council.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and continue. I had two problems, and one was the funding. But I will tell you, and I serve on a health committee nationally, and we've talked about this many times. I do not buy into the fact that violence is a health issue. I think that is being used as an excuse for behavior. I do not buy in to it being a health issue.
I was just waiting for some follow-up to that issue,
No.
but.
I don't really know how to respond to that because that is, something that the CDC is saying and, the federal government. I can't provide a response to that.
And I don't need one.
Yeah, if you're away, I mean, I'm sorry you feel that way, but in terms of all the major health institutions, it's been declared as such. And so I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Any other questions or comments at this time about it?
Just one final question. What will be our opportunity cost if we don't agree to this program for the community?
Say that one
I
more
said,
time.
what will be our opportunity cost if we don't support this program when it
I don't
comes
know.
to addressing violence?
As I think it was said in this article, everybody wants to do something, and we need to do something. And so I hear your point being, well, if not this, then what is your answer? I don't have an answer for that. But I also think that it is our responsibility to ask questions, perform our own due diligence, look for what's going on. This is if it's the idea, of course, I guess you could make the argument, if successful, we would want to continue funding it. But if the question gets down to is how much of a gamble is it to experiment in the name of doing something? That's all I'm getting at. Actually, I'll at least plant the seeds of a couple of in the weeds questions. Obviously, I have monopolized. I looked at my watch a lot of time, and I'll just simply say this. I am kind of curious about some of the distinctions, and maybe we can get an answer to this later. So I'm just going to put out some questions without an answer. And the questions are a little more of understanding the distinction between a program manager and a supervisor. I mean, I read the job. In fact, I asked that. I got copies of your job descriptions this morning. I looked at them. I was just a little curious about that distinction. I mean, I could even make an argument to keep the same number, maybe you need another violence interrupter. It appears to me the outreach worker is a social worker. And I'm kind of curious about that piece and why that couldn't be a part. And I do like, I mean, we had sort of two models in our recommendations that talked about our health department playing a coordinating role, and it had a price tag of which we would be paying some money for that, which would be somewhere in the up to, I'll say 50 grand, without any reductions in the other part. And I am curious that of the outreach, violence interrupters, supervisors, and managers, that's a lot of people out of 8 or 9, that's a lot of titles. But if you had all those, whose payroll are they likely to be on if they're not on a nonprofit's payroll? Because the budget, which was very, I should say, I'll say it's skeleton, that's the right word, skeleton budget. Benefits will change dramatically depending on who's paying them and what kind of benefits are going to be offered. So those are factors. There's a lot of in the weeds questions to even get at, for me, exactly kind of how the model, you know, and I feel sure our folks on the phone feel sure you've been in this a long time, you've experimented with a lot of different models, and I suspect you have roughly some formulas of what you know, here's a population with these kind of things, and this is how many violence interrupters we'd have, and how many groups of 15 people that'd be working with outreach workers and so forth. So I'm gonna figure that's clean with you guys from experience, but I do have a little trouble understanding the distinction between kind of whether they're under an umbrella of a nonprofit, whether they're partly under the umbrella of the health department, and why do we need a program manager and a supervisor when they seem to have very similar skills and training? Maybe that one question you could answer.
Sure. So the program manager, the role is usually the hours are more traditional hours in terms of like 9 to 5, and they're doing a lot of coordinating across agency, across services, and really trying to get volunteers together, making sure the resources across agencies are plugged through, helping with some of the kind of overarching management of it, right? The supervisor is kind of like, think about it like they're like the in the field sergeant. You know, their job, they work the same hours, which are nights and weekends with the staff, and do the day-to-day management, well, evening-to-evening management in terms of briefings, debriefings, individual supervision. There's a staff meeting that takes place with the manager, but those are kind of the distinct roles. What we found is when cities or counties only have one of those roles, which some cases it is because of resources, it's hard to cover that amount of time because oftentimes agencies and resources are like kind of more 9 to 5, and the when we operate tends to be, you know, 2 to 10, 4 to midnight, kind of when those are most likely to be involved in violence take place. So it's kind of a two-part management kind of structure, and that's and the sites that have seen success have had kind of that type of staffing pattern. In terms of the additional money for the health department one, the other budget, the thinking behind that was it'd have to fall under some department or some kind of portfolio of somebody, right? And so having to then pay for some of these level of effort for overall management, I don't know. I mean, that was just, again, ballparking some of that stuff. You know, it just kind of depends. I don't know how the county works there or how the health department, you can just implement a new program, assign it to someone to be under their kind of care without covering part of their salary with it. So that's what that was kind of getting to.
Okay, I got that, and that's in the weeds, and we'll continue talking more. But thank you all for your time today and presentations, and I do hope you'll send Chantel some of the information from the Baltimore work. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, we have one more discussion item that Damon Sanders Pratt is going to cover on our Festivals of Light report, which I feel confident will take less time than this previous item did.
I will be very succinct. So as requested by the commissioners last week, and with the assistance of Parks and Recreation staff, so that's Constantine Stamati, Cameron Goodman, Mike Anderson, and Chris Weevil, we've created a short presentation to give you some of the results of the Festival of Lights this last year. So the 2021-22 version of the light show did well relative to prior shows, and the year-end results received so far seem to bear that out. A number of operational improvements over the last few years have been implemented in an effort to improve the customer experience and the viability of the Festival of Lights. So some of those operational improvements are listed on this sheet here. So we've had improved vehicle stacking ability, which was done in the last season and then also this season. Pre-gatehouse exhibits, improved ticket processing capacity, and then rate adjustments in the current year. So the board will probably remember a capital project where we basically expanded the capacity of the bottom to stack cars. And so this used to be one lane in, and it would loop around to the bottom and then come back to the Tanglewood Boulevard that would take you into the Festival of Lights. It was changed to 2 lanes in and 2 lanes out. So by doing that, we've been able to improve the stacking in the park by about 415 cars. And so as a result, this year, when you see the attendance numbers, that we had a significant number of vehicles come, the most ever other than last season, and not one back up onto I-40 this year, and never had to dump a ramp this year. We put some exhibits in the bottom, so this is the bottom, and up here would be where the show is actually at, as people are looping around. And so there are some exhibits that we've located in the bottom to give people something to look at when they have long wait times at the event. We improved ticket processing capacity. So the park staff built these 2 portable ticket taking stations, and it sits behind the gatehouse. And so as a result, they're able to process 4 cars at once versus 2 cars at once, which helps expedite people going through the show. These are our rates in the current year. So these are increases from last season. So cars were $15 last year. This year they were $23 or $20 if you paid cash. You got a discount if you paid cash. For commercial vehicles, vans and so forth, it used to be $35. This year was $48, and then you got a discount to $45 if you used cash. And then motor coaches and buses was $115. Actually, it's $118, and you got a discount if you used cash. Last year was $100. Comparatively, the Charlotte Motor Speedway show, buses are $140, cars are $30 to $40. And so, and that's $140 to $170, depending on what day you go. Okay. In Greenville, at their Speedway show, cars and minivans are $35, passenger vans are $75, and then their buses are a little cheaper at $100. And then the Greensboro Science Center has a walking tour. It's a little different than that you're walking, but it's $20.50 for an adult member, $24.50 if you're not a member of the Science Center. And then for seniors, it was $15 or $14.50 for seniors and children if you're a member, and $16.50 if you're not a member. And again, they're walking in that tour. So this is the vehicle count comparison for the last 6 years. So you can see if you throw out the pandemic year where basically this was the only show in town, and that was our all-time high, 64,057 vehicles. But if you throw that out, the next all-time high was this year with the increased rate. And with the stacking, we were also still able to keep cars backing on the I-40, which had been a traditional problem. And we somewhat, we feel like, resolved that with the stacking capacity increase at the bottom. So the line in blue is the revenue line. The line in red are the expenditures to support the show, and then green are estimates because we're not finished tallying expenditures, so we're estimating what we think it's going to conclude at. And then the purple line is the net profit. And so you can see that when we raised the price primarily led to this big jump, as well as the significant number of vehicles coming still, despite the increase. So in the past show, we netted $304,000. This year was $635,000 that was basically netted.
Wow. So
with that, I will take any questions or comments.
Best show on Tanglewood's list, and it's the best show ever, right?
So far, so good.
That was great news, and I'd say the solving the stacking problem is amazing, and probably, it probably didn't move any faster except you had a shorter line, because you've now divided the line to two, as the two lines come together, maybe, I don't know, maybe.
And the stacking, I think, has been particularly helpful because the village has grown a lot. Davie County on the other side of the river has grown a lot. The neighborhoods have grown a lot, and the show has grown, a little, but we've been able to stack cars and accommodate growth in those places as well.
It's really good news.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you, and thank all the staff. This is the first year I didn't have a phone call saying bad words.
That's right, that's good. Yes, thank you very much, Damon. I think we're actually ready now to, at least we have a short agenda, and I think we'll review that, and particularly, Mr. Chairman, I'll just continue, go right through
You
that.
turn it over to Damon if you wanted to.
Well, that's good. We can do that. Damon, jump ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioners. So today is your second briefing for the Commissioners' January 20th, 2022 meeting. It's a relatively short agenda as far as the actual number of items at 11. And so with that, the first business agenda item is going to be Chris Murphy briefing a planning item.
Am I supposed to keep this on? Can't remember.
You can take it off.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is, again, the second briefing on this item. This is F-1606, and it is a request to rezone 20 acres along Shore Road, south of the US 52 interchange with Westinghouse, from RS9 to HBS for the use convenience store, motor vehicle repair and maintenance, fuel dealer, and restaurant with a drive-through. This is the legacy growth management plan. The subject property located with the dot, located in the suburban neighborhoods growth management area, again, there just to the west of US 52 on Shore Road. This is the subject property highlighted in yellow. You'll see that it is currently zoned RS9. And it is adjacent to US 52 and across the street from property that is zoned ag. Griffin Road, and there's some residential homes down there. This is the subject property, again, shown on the aerial photo. The blue dot indicates the historic KAPP house that is part of the larger tract of land, but not part of the subject request, but the access to that house is through the subject property, and that access is being maintained as part of this development. Here is the some site photos. This is looking south along Shore Road. The subject property is to the left, and that's the intersection with Griffith Road and Shore Road. This is Shore Road looking north back towards the 52 interchange. The subject property is to the right. And this is the subject property shown on the Tobaccoville area plan update, which was completed in 2013. And you'll notice that the recommended land use in that area plan is for this property to be industrial. This is a site plan that was submitted as part of the request. The buildings in orange are kind of the, what I would call the normal scale gas pumps and convenience store for the general public. The buildings that are indicated in blue are kind of the tractor trailer repair and gas areas, and you also have a large tractor trailer parking area to the rear of the blue building. The arrows that are shown up along Shore Road are the access points. The access that is at the southern end of the site, or at the bottom of this image, is a full access. The image that is at the northern end is a right-in, right-out access, so you would not be able to enter there if you were heading south on Shore Road from the interchange. You would have to go to that southernmost driveway. Over the last day, we did get a revised site plan. The area that is shown in green there was a street yard originally, and that's what's required by the ordinance. There was a recommendation that staff had to make the street yard along that entire segment to be a buffer yard, which has some larger evergreen plantings than just the traditional shrubs and deciduous trees. And they sent us an email yesterday saying that they were agreeable to that. So this is the revised plan that does have that note that they will install the type 1 buffer yard versus the street yard. So I did want to make sure that I pointed that out. And of course, they will be here next week at the hearing, and they can discuss those, that change more. In summary, it was the belief of the planning board that this would negatively impact the viability of large-scale, comprehensively planned industrial development at this location. Per legacy, quality industrial sites should be maintained for industrial development to serve as economic development and job creation opportunities. The thought was that this also may lead to other commercial rezoning requests along Shore Road and Griffin Road, and it would result in a significant increase of traffic in the surrounding area. The Village of Tobaccoville is not supportive of the request, and as was requested last week, I did add a slide that talks about the Village of Tobaccoville's specific opposition. Basically, this just kind of lays the history. There was something that was proposed for this in this area in 2017, but never filed, and they were opposed to that. In 2021, this proposal was submitted. They felt like the truck stop is not consistent with the industrial recommendation of the area plan, and the village was concerned with traffic congestion and crime. They did hold another public meeting in September of 2021 in front of their village council, and following public comment, again recommended that the rezoning request be denied by the commissioners. With that, this was heard by the planning board at their November 10th, 2021 public hearing. There were 7 speakers in opposition, and the planning board voted 5-2 to recommend denial of this request. The 2 planning board members that did recommend that it be approved felt like that the truck stop itself could be integrated into a comprehensively planned industrial development, and that was why they were in opposition to the motion. They felt like that it could be integrated into an industrial park. With that, the site plan does meet UDO requirements. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Could you go back to the map that you shared earlier with there?
This one? Okay.
Could you tell me roughly, I see Griffin Road up there at the top, and I was really trying to get this in my head. Actually, the property's a little further to the, I guess, southeast than I thought, but roughly, do you have an idea of the scale, the distance between Griffin Road and that, and I guess particularly the main entrance, which is the further down there? What kind of distance are we talking about?
The overall distance, and I actually did that not for that purpose, but just I was trying to figure out how many trees and shrubs that would go in, and the distance, the width of that lot is approximately 550 feet. And so you're probably from the center point of that intersection with Griffin Road to the center point of that main full access, you're probably looking at 500 to 550 feet.
Right.
Further to the south.
Yeah, that's actually, that's better than I thought that was. And it does have a turn lane, correct?
Correct. They are installing a left turn lane to get into the site, so it will not, if traffic's heading northbound on Shore Road and someone's trying to turn into the parking lot, they'll be in a turn lane. They will not be obstructing traffic unless you have several trucks stacked up, then you may have an interference, but I imagine that stacking lane is probably a couple hundred feet long, and I don't think there's a lot of traffic currently on Shore Road.
Okay. This is what, 20 acres?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and the industrial park total is how much?
That number I don't have. I can try to chase that down before the next meeting. It's a recommendation of the area plan. I'd have to look up the number of lots. It may be in the staff report, but I'm not sure. But I can find that number out, but I don't want to hazard a guess. My guess would be it's several hundred acres.
Could you go to the?
I thought it was 265, something like that. Did I see that?
Yeah, I think, say that again.
265?
Yeah, could you go to the next picture that shows the gray area? Yeah. Because that industrial part, does that include the gray area, I guess a gray-blue area on both sides of 52?
Well, it does. I think a lot of that is already zoned industrial, because again, this is a land use map, future land use recommendation. So what you have to do is compare to the current land use to the future land use. I imagine all of the property already on the northeast side of 52 is already zoned LI or GI, so it's already considered industrial. The area on the southwest side of 52 currently is not zoned for industrial. It's zoned ag or residential. So the total amount of acreage in the area that we would recommend be rezoned is probably that between 250 and 300 acres would be my guess. Just looking, if that's 20 acres, I would say that that's probably 250 to 300 acres total there.
Yeah, I do
But
know.
I'll try to find the exact number.
Yeah, I do know that the total tract that Mr. Stoltz has is 165 acres, and that's 20 acres out of his tract, which I assume his tract probably includes the historic home too. Oh, yes, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
And the only other question I had is that I know what the site does. It slopes basically to 52. And I know that Shore Road goes, if you're coming toward 52, you go up a hill. So I'm assuming that whole big blue-gray area on that southeast side of 52 is kind of sloping downward.
It is, but I imagine as part of this project, they'll work to balance their cut or fill. You'll probably have a little bit of cut at shore to basically push that to the back of the site to get a level pad for their buildings and for the parking lot. So it definitely is lower than Shore Road, and it's going to be sloping down, but I imagine they're going to build the back part up and take the front part down just a little bit.
I'm thinking of how the rest of that, if we're talking about the compatibility with the industrial development issues and the large area there, is it usable for that? And I just remember you made a comment last week, something about streams and whatever else, about the remaining part of that blue-gray area that goes down there.
I mean, it's definitely, I mean, even if this were to be developed, I believe there is ample room to continue to be able to do industrial development. It really just depends on what they want to do. You could come in with a number of smaller buildings and probably not have as many issues if you come in and do a similar building to what they're doing on Wahlberg Road right now, which is like a 650,000 square foot building. You might have a little bit of difficulty citing it because of the streams, but again, it just really depends on what someone would want to do here. But I definitely think it would still remain viable. It's just the precedent that this would set and the fear that it might lead to other non-industrial requests is part of the reason of the concern. But again, as I alluded to earlier in some side conversations, I believe that the petitioner will bring in an example of a truck stop that has been integrated into a larger industrial park somewhere else that they have a property interest in Florida, I believe.
Got it. Thank you.
I have one question, Mr. Chairman. In terms of land ownership, is it primarily one family that owns most of this property?
Yes, that's my understanding. It is owned by, I believe, two individuals, two families.
Okay.
But related.
Mr. Chairman, question or two. First one, Mr. Attorney, it mentions in the petition about and it's showing it on our KAPP Farm Road as a easement in one of the slides that you passed by on. Looks like that in the site plan, looks like that may be taken into account.
It is.
My question is, you're saying it for certain it is?
If you notice on the image that I have pulled up now, access easement to the Columbus KAPP House, it is incorporated as part of this project. And I believe there's a deed book and page reference there, and it's still being, it says existing 15-foot access easement to be abandoned within the Love's property, but I believe that what they're doing is they're providing them an access easement in another location. says 25-foot access easement by Love's to replace existing access easement. So there's not a conflict on there. They're relocating it slightly.
So they're proposing to work that out.
Correct.
So, a while back, 2-3 months ago, we had a zoning matter, and there was easement involved in it. And as I recall, Mr. Attorney, you said that that was a legal easement, and in that particular case was a matter between, it was a private matter between the parties. Well, when a zoning matter is in the works and easement is, and I'm acknowledging that Chris is saying that according to the information he has, it's being proposed to be dealt with. Do we have responsibility to, well, I know for certain, and I guess this the site plan is probably as certain as it gets. Do we, it seems like if it did come down to a situation where, well, planning is not going to allow somebody to be landlocked over a easement, and one of the person where has the legal easement states that they would be, but planning is not. Somewhere in the process, somebody just can't be landlocked over a situation like that. I saw it wasn't of our doings, it was some other jurisdictions. The jurisdiction didn't do it, but there was easement in play, and I saw something there that I couldn't believe. I'm glad it didn't happen to me. But it got worked out. So that's one of the questions you saying it's being addressed, and I guess along the way, if whoever was opposed to and talked about the easement, we will, and I'm acknowledging what you're saying. I just want to be sure that we just want to know that it is being a matter that's being addressed. I'm trying to use my words carefully. And as far as buffer or screening to the back, and I haven't been by there recently, but to the back and to the side, to the east and to the south, if enough existing vegetation is there, that can be considered as buffer and screening, can it?
It can be if it's on their site. If it's not, again, you got to remember they're cutting 20 acres out of a larger tract. I'm not sure where the wood line is. Yeah, if there's existing vegetation, it can count. But if it's not on the property that they're rezoning, they will have to install buffers to the west.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. That whole area, when you're traveling north, you can look over there, and it was logged probably 2-3 years. Some of the area, and I don't know whether part of this area was or not, but it was big forest, and there's some existing vegetation there. And I don't know that it's on this piece of property, but you answered the question. If it's on this piece of property and it meets criteria, it can be used as buffer or the buffer and the screening.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Chris? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So agenda item number 2 is a resolution designating new review officers to review and certify maps and plats for Forsyth County, North Carolina, in accordance with North Carolina General Statute 47-30.2. So last week, Chris gave a brief summary of this item. It's been necessitated by a couple of retirements. In Kernersville, their planner has retired, and in High Point, their planner has retired. And so they've been replaced with new officers, Cameron Colvin for Town of Kernersville, Carolyn Drake in Clemens, and then Aaron King was removed from the list that the board approved just back in April because he got moved into the manager's office. So this item basically just appoints those people. Agenda item number 3 is approval of the minutes for the January 6, 2022 meeting. Madam Clerk.
They were mailed out this morning, so you'll have a week to review.
Very good. Agenda item number 4 is an amendment to the Pandemic Response Special Review Fund to appropriate $2,560,630 in funding for the Low Income Energy Assistance Program. It's American Recovery Plan Act money. This item was briefed by Kyle Wolf last week. With these ARPA funds, if people have children that are up to 10 years old, they're currently in the Family and Nutrition Services Program, and have received Low Income Energy Assistance Program funding in the last fiscal year, then they're eligible for household assistance for utilities, depending on their type of utility. So it's $300 if they use wood, $400 if they use gas, and $500 if they use electric. This is pass-through funding. If there are no questions, agenda item number 5 is a budget ordinance amendment to appropriate $7,000 in additional Winston-Salem Foundation grant funds for improvements to the Arboretum at Tanglewood. Those additional $7,000 would provide $15,000 from a previous grant allocation to improve the irrigation system at the Arboretum at Tanglewood. Kimberly Boosie in the budget office briefed that last week. If there are no questions there, agenda item number 6 was briefed by Mike Pollock. It's a resolution approving refunds by the tax assessor collector in the amount of $351.46. Items number 7 through 10 are reports. The October 2021 Human Resources Report, the December 2021 Contribution-Based Benefit CAPP Report, the Communication Specialist 2021 Annual Report, and then the Experiment in Self-Reliance is submitting a 2022-23 Community Services Block Grant application, and they have to provide that to the board for information. With that, agenda item number 11 was an added item that I briefed last week, and so we placed it on the agenda for this week, and it's a resolution awarding a contract for emergency watershed protection projects, and again, I briefed that. It is for a contract amount of $240,833.05 to contract to do the the grading, seeding, and clearing out the channel that are in these different areas of Buffalo Creek and also in Kernersville. And the $75,000 balance of the grant funding would be authorized for the manager for change orders if that were needed. That's item number 11, and that's the agenda for the meeting of the 20th.
Good. That's for adjournment. Very good.
We have a motion by Commissioner Ted Kaplan to adjourn. I will second that motion.
Second.
I just